Until recently, I lived in a private house with my parents. They have always been characterized by a strict temperament and difficult character, so we had guests almost never. The only one of my friends with whom my parents were able to get along a little was Lyoka. I had known him since first grade, and he was probably the only one I could fully trust in a difficult situation. Unlike my parents, who found it easier to scold me for my mistakes than to teach me not to make them, Lyoka was always ready to help. He had much more worldly experience than I did. He grew up without a father, worked from the age of 14, and even had time to go out with girls. One thing he was unlucky about was his mother was an alcoholic. Half of the alimony she drank away, and the second bought Lyosha food. But still he had what I could only dream of as a child: freedom. A year after he came of age, his mother died, so Lyosha got the apartment. A week ago, he came to visit me in the evening. His parents went to the theater, so the house was at our disposal for the next 3 hours. We didn't even think about any parties, because we knew how it could turn out. It made no sense to organize them in Lehigh's apartment. Despite my age, 19 years old, my father was categorically against my sleepovers somewhere outside the house. That's why I took my friend's idea of buying an inexpensive apartment on the outskirts of the city very positively. All fire Lyoka, but to save from pocket money for an apartment. It is, of course, powerful. I can hardly buy a decent house, I said. You can, smiled Leka. Not only decent, but also new in new buildings. Then I'd rather have a house. My voice sounded upset. I'm serious, said Lyoka firmly. Everything has already been invented. My neighbor recently pulled off a similar scheme, now lives and is happy. Look, your money is enough for an apartment in an old 5-story building on the outskirts. It was built poorly, the foundation was badly laid, the house sagged. Now there's a crack along the wall and there's mold and the heating went down. The house was recognized as an emergency and under the new program is being prepared for demolition, and the residents will be relocated to new buildings. See where I'm going with this? And the owner is some kind of major, he doesn't need the apartment for nothing, he'll give it away for a penny. Well, and if what happens, we with the guys will lend you up to the full amount, he smiled. But we have to hurry. They'll ban buying apartments there some time before demolition. Are you offering me to live in a shithole, which at any moment can collapse on my head? Come on. Cut Lyoka, you live there for less than a month, will not have time to collapse. And as soon as they move in, you and I will have a housewarming party. Well, how do you like the motivation? I told him I'd think about it and give my decision tomorrow afternoon. I had to discuss everything with my parents and, if they agreed, to prepare myself for the purchase. The conversation was long. I gave a lot of arguments and explained Lehin's plan several times. After a decent amount of time, my mother still supported me, followed by my father. I was happy, and the next day I went to Lyoka's place. The rent was a little less than the amount I had saved up. My family was very wealthy, my parents were not stingy on pocket money, and I was modest and knew how to save money. And I had nowhere to spend it, except to treat Lyoka in a cafe or once a year to buy myself new clothes. Also in the course went accumulated from lousy part-time job stock. The last year I, running away from parental care, on weekends dragged with Lyoka on various shabashki. The seller turned out to be an adequate young guy, a little older than me and Lyoka. He got the apartment from his grandmother, whom he did not know, so he had no warm feelings for the apartment and put it up for sale as soon as possible. The apartment was located on the 4th floor. The front iron door stood out nicely against the background of the shabby and painted walls, but behind it was not the best sight. Inside was a disgusting mess, as if all the neighborhood cats had taken a dump here. In some places the wallpaper was peeling off in shreds, and instead of the chandeliers I was used to seeing, the rooms were lit by dim bulbs sticking out of dust-covered black sockets on ghastly wires. In the corner of the kitchen window, a scotch-taped crack glistened. In the big room stood the sold-out sofa on which the grandmother had rested. We immediately packed it up and covered it with a sheet. In the second room, smaller, there was a closet, a bed, and a nightstand. Well, we can live, smiled Lyoka. And you cannot stay at your place? I asked, looking at the stained linoleum in the room. The apartment is registered for me, which means that I'll be moved anyway. I don't have to live here. There's such a thing, he hesitated. I don't live alone. Remember Liska from the second group? Everything became clear. I'd have to live here. At least here I had all the comforts, and the iron door protected me from the outside world. My conscience didn't allow me to go to my parents' house for the night, and I didn't want to see my father's smirk, disappointed by his son's helplessness and unpreparedness for independent life. Toward evening, we moved my things from my parents, and Lyoka went home. I had only tap water for dinner, so I decided to go grocery shopping. The 5-story building stood far away from the other houses, so it took a little more than 15 minutes to get to the store. When I returned, it was dark outside and the streetlights were on. Outside my driveway, I noticed a silhouette. A little hesitant, I decided to say hello. "Who are you?" the silhouette asked. "I live here now." I was confused. The silhouette put out his cigarette and approached me. It was a woman of short stature, middle-aged, well-preserved for her age, but with a hoarse, smoky voice. "Ludmila," she extended her hand. "Sergey. How long have you been here, Sergey?" "I moved in today, and you?" "All my life." "Wow." I stretched out. "Have you heard, by the way, that they want to demolish the house?" "I heard. The officials think that we can easily throw us out of here. They promise us new houses, but they will give us a bed in a hostel at best." Ludmila started talking. "But that's not the case. I'll still live here, even if this crack goes all the way through my apartment." "Is there a lot of people living here?" I asked out of politeness. "No, it's just me and Boris Anatolievich. He used to serve in the Navy, and they gave him this apartment for his length of service. Then his daughter and her family died in an accident, so he's the only one left here. He lives on the 5th floor." We talked for a couple of minutes until another silhouette appeared from the darkness of the courtyard. His posture was straight and his step was firm, but the limp on one leg and heavy breathing gave him away as an old man. "Meet Boris Anatolievich, Sergey." Ludmila nodded toward the silhouette. The man stepped into the light. It was an elderly, gray-haired man. I extended my hand to him, but there was no response. His eyes were troubled, and he glanced at the windows of the house, obviously terribly worried about something, and then he stared at me and said sternly, "Lock the doors at night." "Doors?" I asked him again. The old man did not answer and silently hurried up the stairs. Ludmila and I looked at each other. We felt uneasy. After a while, we went to our apartments. The request with the doors puzzled me. At night, I closed the iron door on all revolutions, and also the wooden door leading to my room on a small bolt. I couldn't sleep for a long time. My thoughts were interfering with the new place, and the old man wouldn't leave my mind. Marasmus, I thought, and calmed down. In the night, I was awakened by a noise from the apartment above, as if they were moving heavy furniture on the floor. Then footsteps, a terrible rumble. The last straw was the sharp clink of something glass shattering on the floor. I got out of bed and knocked on the radiator, and everything went quiet. The rest of the night passed quietly. In the morning before the institute, I met Ludmila at the entrance and politely inquired about the apartment above me. She, smiling, replied, "Boris Anatolievich's apartment, I told you. There are 2 of us left here." I thought to myself, and smiling back, I went to my studies. The day went as usual. After class, I stopped by Lyoka's place. He introduced me to Lisa, and I stayed there until evening. I returned home late, already under the light of the street lamps. The silhouette stood in front of the entrance again. "How was your day, Ludmila?" I smiled at my neighbor. She did not answer, but only looked at me fearfully. "Something happened?" "Sergey, I do not know." Her voice trembled. Almost stammering from fear, she continued, "I just came back from work, stood here smoking, and then suddenly I look at my window, and there the light turned on." She swallowed and exhaled. "And then one, and it was off. Maybe there's someone out there." "Come on," I smiled. The house is more years old than you and I are together, so the wiring is acting up. Would you like me to come in and check it out? If it's not too much trouble, Sergey, she said, a little calmer, and handed me the keys. How I cursed myself for this, but it was too late to retreat. I had pepper spray with me, which gave me a little confidence. The door to Ludmila's apartment was closed. With a trembling hand, I turned the key, entered, and quickly turned on the hallway light. No one was there. I checked the kitchen, then the hall and bedroom empty. I opened the kitchen window and shouted to Ludmila. She looked up, smiled with relief, and came into the entryway. She offered to drink tea and sit at her place, but I politely declined and wandered back to my apartment. About an hour passed. I sat at my laptop and watched the show. The window in the room was fully open, and I could hear everything that was going on outside, whether it was the voices of alkies passing by or the sounds of cars passing somewhere far away. Suddenly, I heard a woman scream. I jumped up from my seat out of fright, looked out the window, no one. Again the scream. Now I realized it was coming from our house. Everything came together in my head. I felt cold. My body felt as if it were one big piece of ice. Only Ludmila could be screaming, I thought, but who could have heard her? It's not like I heard anyone come into the entryway. And if no one did not come in, oh my God, there was someone inside. But where? I checked everything. I froze for a moment. My eyes opened so wide they looked like they were about to fall out. My breath hitched. I didn't check the bathroom. The nasty thought slapped against the crust of my brain and left its sticky residue there. When the stupor let go, I hurriedly turned off the lights in the room, grabbed my phone, and stood at the window, covering myself with the curtain so I could see who was coming out of the entryway and, if necessary, identify the perpetrator to the police. Called 02. The dispatcher reported that the squad had already left. The police beaver arrived in 10 minutes. I was surprised at such haste and very happy, because during all this time no one had come out of the entrance. 3 policemen ran into the house, and 1 stayed outside. I waved to him and gave him the number of the apartment so that the policeman could take my statement. There was a knock at the door. It was 2 operatives. They wrote down everything I told them, and then invited me to Ludmila's apartment. Her body was lying in the bathtub. A trail of blood stretched from the bathtub to the kitchen window. She probably wanted to call for help. The cause of death was not determined on the spot. No wounds, blood was just pouring out of her mouth, and the nails on her hands were broken, as if she had fought with someone before her death. According to police, the door had to be forced open. It was locked and had no signs of forced entry, which means that the perpetrator had keys, thanks to which he gained access to Ludmila's apartment. The investigator assumed that the murderer left the building through the attic, crossed the roof to another entrance, and went out the door, which is on the opposite side of the house from my window. The investigator left his number and left. Ludmila's body was soon taken away. It was unbearably creepy and morally hard to spend the night alone. I called Lyoka and suggested that he come to my place. He arrived reluctantly. The night passed as it always did. We went to bed late. About 4 o'clock, I heard a familiar rumbling, a low, quiet voice, and loud footsteps. Sure enough, the old man started jumping on the spot. After 5 minutes, it stopped and I fell asleep. At breakfast, Lyoka shared his impressions after the overnight stay. Not only that you put me to sleep on the floor, I could not sleep half the night because of it, but also some idiot jumps midnight me out of sleep. Did you hear that too? I smiled. It's my upstairs neighbor, the moronic grandfather. Upstairs neighbor? So you have a psychotic grandfather living here, and you make me go to your place in the middle of the night and climb a dark staircase? What if he killed a woman? I shuddered. Nightmarish images appeared in my head as the grandfather comes down to Ludmila, opens the door, hides in the bathroom, and waits until the defenseless woman is home alone and decides to take a shower after a hard day's work. Did you tell the cops about him? Saved me from the intracranial horror movie-like voice. What's the point? I justified myself. They'll start questioning him, and he'll move the nightstand in front of them. I was asked how many tenants in the house. I said 2. You're not lying. He's a sick man. On the first day, he came to me and said, "Close the doors at night." Ludmila told me that his whole family had died in an accident, and that's when things started to move. Well, as you know, Lyoka shrugged his shoulders. He finished his coffee, pushed the mug away and thought, "You told me yesterday that you thought about the bathroom, like the killer was sitting there, and now I thought about it and I realized that, close the doors at night, what is this about?" I got worried. "When you left, this woman," continued Lyoka, "heard that she closed the door exactly on the lock." "I don't remember," I admitted. Lyoka raised his eyebrows and stared at me creepily. "Enough." I waved away. First warned, then killed, and then locked the door so that no one would guess. He could barely breathe, and he wasn't even capable of murder. The day passed quickly. There were only 2 classes, so I came home early. Her brother had come to Ludmila's apartment. I met him on the landing and asked him about their family. He told me that Luda had never had a husband or children. She had been unlucky in life. He lived in another city and had come here for his sister's funeral. I spent the rest of the day at home, watching a TV series, went to bed early. My mood was bad. At night, I was awakened again by a noise from upstairs. This time they were jumping more often and harder, as if trying to pierce the floor with their feet. I managed to fall asleep. I got up very early. Leka's words did not get out of my head. Was grandfather really capable of something like that? I decided to call the investigator, thinking that he would call me to the department, but the investigator arrived an hour later. When I told him about my suspicions, he decided to interrogate the old man and called the staff. They arrived quickly and told me to go upstairs with them as an interrogator. They knocked for a long time, but Boris didn't open the door. Then the investigator, rubbing his tired red eyes, ordered one of the policemen to break down the flimsy wooden door. Without a warrant. He smiled. "We'll write it out later," the investigator muttered. Behind the door was a well-maintained apartment, with a beige doormat with brown inlays along the corridor and portraits of young Boris Anatolievich and his family hanging on the walls. The investigator pulled the handle of the closed door to the bedroom. It creaked open, and we entered the room. Boris Anatolievich's pale body was sitting in a chair in front of a huge mirror, with gray hair lying around him, as if torn from his head, and shards of something glassy, stained with blood. The old man's eyes were open, staring at the reflection of the door in the mirror. The dead man was looking right at us. The investigator called an ambulance and the old man was taken away. I stayed home, didn't go to the university. I called Lyoka, but he didn't pick up. I felt lonely and creepy. At night, I closed all the doors and windows, went to bed with the lamp on and miraculously fell asleep. It was dawning. I opened my eyes, looked at the ceiling and thought. Suddenly, I heard a familiar rumbling, jumping and fast running in the apartment above. Now it's jogging in the mornings, I thought. The realization of the situation came in a couple of seconds. Almost choking with horror, I jumped out of bed and with trembling hands dialed the police number. Time dragged on mockingly long. When the noise from upstairs subsided, I heard a police car rushing up the stairs. The apartment was searched, no one was there. The policeman agreed to stay with me until I left. I got dressed very quickly. In a hurry, I packed my laptop, money, and passport. In a panic, I even forgot where I threw my cell phone, so I had to dial it from my home phone, which I had never used until then. On the way to Lyoka, the investigator told me about the results of my grandfather's autopsy. It turns out that he had been dead for 3 days at least, so he was killed the night he told me about the doors. Devastated, I went to Lyoka's house and sat in his yard until evening. When Lyoka came home from the institute, we decided to take 3 of our friends with us and get my remaining things from the apartment. The street lights started to come on as we approached the house. It was frankly a bad idea to go in the evening. At the driveway, I shifted my gaze to my windows. The lights turned on for a moment and then went out. I almost fainted. I don't remember how we got home. Lyosha says that I shouted to everyone to get away from that house and run. Now I live with Lyosha, waiting for the demolition of the house. And yesterday I found on my cell phone the second missed call from the home phone of my apartment. I threw away the SIM card along with the receiver. It's not my problem anymore.